Welcome to the Recommended Daily Value Podcast, your daily dose into the health and wellness world.
Welcome back to the Recommended Daily Value Podcast, where we dive into everything health, fitness, and nutrition related 5 days a week in 5 minutes or less. This podcast is brought to you by Umzu, and I'm your host, Tyler Woodward. If you're not already, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button, because today's topic of the day is the effective reps theory. The effective reps theory was pioneered by Chris Beardsley, who's a strength and conditioning researcher and probably one of the most cited individuals in the field today. And if I were to sum up my interpretation of his theory, it would be with this quote from Mike Tyson. When Tyson was asked how many sit-ups he could do, he famously responded, "I don't count my sit-ups. I only start counting when it starts hurting. That is when I start counting, because then it really counts." And he was pretty much right. You've likely seen a lot of people saying today that rep range doesn't matter for hypertrophy or muscle growth, whether it's from 6 reps to 30 reps. As long as you're getting close enough to failure within the exercise, you'll still see the same amount of hypertrophy. So Beardsley's effective rep theory basically states that only the last few reps, specifically the last 5 reps approaching failure, are what contribute to muscle growth. This is largely a function of how our muscles work. To explain this, I like to use the analogy of what I call the superhero analogy. You may have heard that humans only use about 10% of their brain, and if we could unleash the full potential of our brain, we'd all be superheroes with a bunch of superpowers. Well, this turns out to not be true, but it provides a great analogy for how muscles work. Your brain or nervous system is always trying to conserve as much energy as possible. So it wouldn't make a lot of sense if every time you needed to scratch your head or pick up your phone, if every muscle in your arm fired with maximal intensity. Instead, your brain basically tells your muscle to use proportionally as little muscle as possible to move a given load. If you're not aware, our muscles are divided up into many motor units, which is a nerve connected to a given amount of muscle fibers. I like to imagine a muscle like a big rope that's made up of a ton of smaller ropes, which are equivalent to our individual muscle fibers. If we continue to move said load, like when doing a bicep curl, the first portion of our muscles, or the smallest motor units, begin to fatigue. So our brain progressively calls upon bigger and stronger motor units, or more and more of the muscle, to move said load. These big, strong motor units are called our high threshold motor units and are only called upon or recruited when we're approaching failure in a given exercise or movement. This is called Henneman's size principle. These high threshold motor units is where most of the magic comes from in terms of muscle growth. This is where most of our muscle growth and strength gains occur. This is in contrast to the low threshold motor units, which are very important, and these things allow us to execute fine motor functions like writing, typing, talking, etc. Basically what happens toward the end of the set is your rep speed unintentionally slows down. If you've ever seen someone attempt a true 1 rep max or done so yourself, you'll have seen how slow and grindy these reps are. This low rep speed maximizes our muscles' ability to produce force, at least in part to maximizing motor recruitment or recruiting that entire muscle. So back to that superhero analogy, the slow rep speed allows for close to 100% of our muscle to be active, which allows us to produce the most force. The practical takeaway from this is that you must train relatively close to failure to experience significant amounts of muscle growth. Another way to think about this might be that muscle growth is in part about adequately fatiguing a muscle, so it has to use every last ounce of the muscle to move a given load. So practically, let's say if you can do maximum of 20 reps on the bench press with 50 pounds. If you do 3 sets of 15, you're unlikely to experience much muscle growth because you never got to the necessary point of fatigue to recruit enough of your muscle fibers to result in muscle growth or recruiting those high threshold motor units. And you don't need to go to failure every set, but you should be getting close to failure in all of your working sets, in my opinion. Also, being that most people stop way short of true failure according to a lot of the research, I think you're better off going pretty close to failure, or at least trying to. Well, that's it for this episode, so make sure to train hard, and if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to hit that subscribe button and to share with a friend. And remember, these opinions are my own, based on my own research and experiences, and is not medical advice. Till next time, be good.